Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we have a long list of VR games that you just might want to avoid. Now this isn't just a group of crappy VR games that isn't worth your time, and in fact many of these titles are quite excellent, but for one reason or another, you might want to steer clear. This video has been designed to give you a little bit more insight on the VR gaming industry, and of course just entertain. There are links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead, but before we jump in, this video is brought to you by my sponsor Kiwi Design. They currently make my favorite Quest 2 Elite strap, which comes in multiple different versions. You can add an extra battery pack, high quality headphones, or even both. They also have other products like Valve Index style hand straps, and they just introduced a brand new RGB stand. Your controllers and headset magnetically connect. There's a charging indicator so you'll know when your headset's ready to go, and there's plenty of different RGB color options available. There's a link to Kiwi Design down in the description, and don't forget to use discount code Mateo311 for 5% off and to help support this channel. Okay, so all of today's titles have a very specific reason as to why you should avoid them, and the first one up is Epic Roller Coasters. Unless you're interested in testing yourself for motion sickness, you probably want to steer clear of this title. I know, mixing roller coasters and VR sounds tempting, and it gets even more enticing when you notice the game is free. But trust me when I say this, a VR roller coaster can be an extremely nauseating experience. Now I can already see some of the comments. I don't understand how people get motion sick. I never get motion sick. You just don't have your VR legs yet. But everyone has a different experience with motion sickness, and even after 7 years of VR gaming, if anything will upset me at all, it's going to be something like a virtual roller coaster. After about 30 minutes of epic roller coasters, I do start to feel a bit off, and I'm really not susceptible to motion sickness at all, so if you are someone with a sensitivity, epic roller coasters can take you to barf central. Now, while discomfort is definitely a reason to avoid a game, another big one is when an application is dead, dying, or in the process of disappearing. Now, there's a few games I have to mention because you may have heard that they're hidden gems. The first one on that list is Silicon Rising, which was an absolutely stunning bullet hell first-person shooter featuring an excellent amount of variety. There was an extremely difficult arcade mode that played a bit like a Time Crisis cover shooter and required you to quickly teleport between nodes, plus eliminate enemies and dodge bullets at breakneck speed. And then by popular demand, they added a more traditional gameplay mode, which featured free locomotion and a much more casual level of difficulty. And on top of all of this, they had epic boss fights, stunning graphics, a variety of mechanics like a sniping level, and another where you're driving a vehicle, plus an intriguing and immersive world to experience. So now you're probably wondering, why should you avoid this title? Well, it's been pulled from Steam without warning, and when I spoke to the devs, they said they have no idea what happened. Now, originally gamers were claiming that Meta must have paid off the studio to make the title exclusive on their storefront, but even that version is completely broken and no longer works. It'll give you some error message about not being able to connect to the servers, which is definitely weird for a single player title. Now, moving on to another game that I absolutely loved but can't recommend right now is Swords of Gura. Now, it pains me to say this, especially because I am friends with the developer. This game featured way ahead of its time multiplayer sword fighting. The only issue is it's PC VR only, and after a couple years the player base has just dried up. Now it was in the works to bring this to the Quest 2, but development there is kind of hung up. Now there is the possibility this will change in the future, and if it does, I'll be singing this title's praises once again. And the last title on the you most likely heard it's awesome list, but I can't recommend it right now, is In Death. Now, I do have to clarify something. I am talking about the PC version of In Death, where development stopped years ago. The Quest version, In Death Unchained, remains very much alive, constantly gets new updates, and I definitely recommend it. Now, while the PC version is still really cool, it kind of feels like an abandoned, unfinished project. But let's move into some other games that are in the process of dying off. Now, the current state of multiplayer VR shooters is always in flux, but the majority have managed to find some form of stable player base. When it comes to Nerf Ultimate Championship, on the other hand, though, the end is near. Now, this title has already been pulled from the Quest store, and as of August 31st, the servers are going offline, and you'll no longer be able to play. Now, I mention this just in case the title's been sitting in your library, and you thought it might be a good idea to give it a try, but I definitely recommend against that, because if you end up enjoying it, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Just like our next title, Echo VR. Unlike Nerf Ultimate Championship, this game was extremely popular, but is still going offline anyway. This zero-G game of rugby meets Rocket League has been free to play for years and accumulated thousands of extremely competitive players. It was funding itself with season passes and paid cosmetics, but the shutdown is already in the works, and this game is also going offline in August. Now, while we're on the topic of free-to-play games, that brings us to another big reason why you might want to avoid certain titles. Now, while this isn't only an issue in free-to-play games, it is a lot more common to see both kids and toxic communities when a game happens to be free. Now, the first title in this group is Gorilla Tag. Say what you will about this game, love it or hate it, but I've heard a pretty excessive amount amount of racism, vulgarity, and straight up toxicity in some random online matches. Now this is semi-expected in a title that just focuses on fooling around, but I have zero interest in being anywhere full of kids screaming obscenities. Now I'm not saying this will be your guaranteed experience, nor am I saying the game isn't fun, especially when you're in there with some buddies, but if you absolutely want to avoid kids or that type of behavior, steer clear of Gorilla Tag, just like our next title, Rec Room. Now in truth, my experiences have been much better with this title, and both vulgarity and racism have not been an issue, but you will definitely encounter some kids. Now it hasn't bothered me too much, and I've still been able to have a lot of fun in game, but just know you are playing in the playground, just like Among Us. This game of backstabbing and deceit is an absolute blast, especially when you're in a group with your friends, but I've also wanted to rip my headset off when a game is full of a bunch of squeakers. This just comes with the territory on some of those younger themed games, and at least Among Us is an all-for-one title, so it's not like you actually have to cooperate with a bunch of kids, unlike the next title, Population 1. This is an absolutely fantastic battle royale title, but you will have to rely on your squad, and there's nothing worse than a bunch of squeaking going on in the mic, teammates who just won't listen, or having to listen to someone's mom in the background reprimanding them while you're just trying to play a game. Now obviously you can still play with your friends, and the new sandbox mode gives you so many new ways to experience this title, making it a lot easier to avoid annoying people, but ever since the title has gone free to play, there are of course plenty of younger kids running around in game now. But maybe kids don't bother you, or you just so happen to be one. Instead, what might be much more annoying is games that you just can't jump right into and stop playing. Our next two titles are indeed excellent, but require some heavy modding. Now I'm obviously talking about Skyrim and Fallout 4 VR. The vanilla versions are practically broken, and their non-VR roots are as clear as day. Luckily though, both of these titles have an extreme amount of modding capability. Not only can you fix all of the issues Bethesda left behind, but also tack on so many new features that the games actually end up feeling like native VR titles. There's full physics and collision systems, massive graphical overhauls that do much more than just upgrade the game's low-resolution textures. There's gesture-based spell systems, much more VR-friendly UIs. You'll be able to control things like shouts with your voice, and most recently, ChatGPT has been added into Skyrim, creating some self-aware style NPCs who can have a never-ending conversation with you. So I guess it's time to spend another 1,000 hours in both Skyrim and Fallout, but just be prepared to spend about 50 to 100 hours downloading and installing mods first. Now to make that process much easier, I highly recommend you check out the work from Genghis VR, as she's created some top-notch VR mods for these titles. But let's move on from games that require mods to be good, to titles that are just incomplete as they stand. First up is an early access game that I absolutely loved, and you might have even seen it on a VR hidden gem list. Everslot VR was this wild combination of Diablo meets Doom. It was extremely fast-paced, brutal, and not only had its own sense of style, but some fantastic graphics. The roadmap was set to eventually turn this into something much closer to Diablo, but the project has been put on hold, and a spin-off, Quest-exclusive Horde mode co-op title has become the studio's major focus. Now the new game will be releasing soon, and it's definitely fun, but it just doesn't offer the same experience. Now another title that I absolutely love, but it's sitting in development purgatory, is Legendary Tales. This is an absolutely fantastic 4-person co-op RPG, which has an extremely rewarding class system. If you spend your time casting spells, you'll naturally become a better magic user, and in similar fashion, if you go around swinging heavy weapons, you'll get stronger. Focusing in on critical hits will raise your dexterity, and just getting the snot beat out of you time and time again will turn you into more of a tank. You're rewarded for playing exactly how you want, and then there's a huge perk system to customize your character to perfection. Honestly, if this game had a storyline, cosmetic options, and more overall content, it would be my favorite game. But as it stands right now, it's missing all of those items. And while we've been promised a pretty huge update is on the way, it's been an extremely long time since we've seen anything. But let's move on to some comical reasons as to why people should avoid certain games. The first one is the fact that the original Resident Evil 4 has been modified by the evil Meta Corporation. How dare they make changes to such a classic? I wanted to make Leon look up Ashley's skirt and have her call me a pervert. I want to keep all the original sexist comments and innuendos intact. This is ridiculous censorship. Is not something I would actually ever say, because it's total BS. Sure, the game has been changed. You can say people are being too sensitive these days, whatever the case may be, but it doesn't alter the actual gameplay. A lot of things that were acceptable back in the day, like smoking on an airplane or driving without a seatbelt, or even borderline racism on TV, just isn't acceptable anymore. Now, if they made any real changes that impacted the storyline, then sure, I would be annoyed. But if they want to cut out a juvenile boob joke here and there, I'm okay with it. Now, go ahead and cue the nasty people in my comments right now. Something censorship and freedom. Alright, whatever. developer. Now finally, we have two amazing games that everyone should play, but just be warned that after you play them, everything else is going to look like crap by comparison. Now obviously the first on that list is Half-Life Alyx, where Valve showed us the true capabilities of VR. Now if you're going to be one of those people that goes into my comments and tells me how Half-Life Alyx is overrated, you can go ahead and use the X in the top right corner of your browser right now and just peace the hell out. Half-Life Alyx is an absolute masterpiece, and after over 3 years, still no one has come close to it, except for maybe another Half-Like. Now let's face it, Vertigo 2 is no Half-Life Alyx, but the fact that it was made by a solo developer pretty much mocks the whole VR industry. It's a lengthy, complex campaign with a ton of variety, excellent graphics, a pretty insane amount of polish, and easily one of the best VR games to come out in years. Now I know it was in development for an extended period of time, plus there were no publishing overlords breathing down the developer's neck to rush this out, but at the same time, if a single person can deliver this amount of quality, there's just no excuse for the rest of the industry to continually hand us short, shallow, casual experiences. And that right there was my list of games that you might not want to try for some really specific reasons. Please let me know what you think down in the comments, and if there were any other titles I should have added.
And that was today's video, brought to you by my dad, Mateo311. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here,
Consider subscribing.
consider
Consider subscribing.
consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
We'll see you guys on next time.
We'll see you guys on next time.